Judge Todd Anderson looked at the plea agreement. Just 90 days for a mother whose negligence led to her baby's death. He looked at Alyssa Smith. And then he did something almost unheard of. He rejected the deal entirely and gave her the maximum sentence. 3 years in prison. But it was what Royal's aunt said in that courtroom that changed everything. Her words, they captured exactly why this case matters, and why I need your help right now. This video contains disturbing details involving infant death and animal attack. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you're sensitive to child abuse cases, please consider whether to continue. What if you walked into a courtroom expecting mercy, expecting a second chance, expecting just 90 days behind bars, and instead, the judge looked you in the eye and sentenced you to 3 years in prison? What could change everything in those few moments? This is the story of Royal Bates, a 6-month-old baby boy from Marion, Ohio, a child who never got to celebrate his first birthday, never got to speak his first words, never got to take his first steps. Royal's life was cut short in April 2024 in a way that shocked an entire community and left investigators struggling to understand how this tragedy was allowed to happen. When Royal's mother, Alyssa Smith, stood before Judge Todd Anderson, she believed she had a deal. 90 days in jail, probation, a chance to move forward. But then Royal's aunt stepped up to the microphone, and what she said in that victim impact statement made the judge throw out any leniency. This is a story about negligence, about ignored warnings, and about justice that came too late for an innocent child. Before we jump into what led to Royal's preventable death, I need your help making sure stories like this reach people who can recognize warning signs and save children. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. Share this video. Every share could reach someone who needs to see these red flags. In the comments, write your city and viewing time. This helps me publish investigations when they'll reach the maximum number of people. My channel exists to seek justice for the most vulnerable, children who needed protection but didn't get it. Each case is a lesson in recognizing danger. Watch other videos here because this knowledge could help you protect a child someday. And if this work matters to you and you're able to support it, click the Super Thanks button below this video. Every contribution helps fund better equipment and deeper investigations into cases like Royal's. Thank you. So, what exactly did Blake and Alyssa Smith ignore? What warnings did they receive that could have saved Royal's life? Let me show you the timeline that led to this tragedy. Royal Bates came into this world in October 2023. His parents, Alyssa Smith and Blake Bates, were young adults living in Marion, Ohio, a small city about 50 miles north of Columbus. Marion is a tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone, the kind of place where neighbors look out for each other, where children should be safe. Royal was their son, a baby who depended entirely on his parents for protection, for care, for love. At 6 months old, Royal was at that beautiful stage where babies start recognizing faces, responding to voices, beginning to explore the world around them. The home where Royal lived with Alyssa Smith and Blake Bates was not just occupied by humans. Multiple dogs lived in the household, pit bull-type dogs. And one dog in particular would become central to this tragedy, a pit bull mix named Kilo. Now, pit bulls are controversial dogs. Some people swear by them as loyal family pets. Others point to statistics showing they're involved in a disproportionate number of fatal attacks. But here's what is not controversial. Any dog with a documented history of aggression, regardless of breed, poses a serious risk, especially to infants and small children who cannot defend themselves. Blake Bates owned Kilo, and Blake Bates knew something that should have changed everything. Kilo had attacked before. Approximately 1 year before Royal's death, Kilo attacked a neighborhood child. This was not a minor incident. This was not a dog nipping or snapping. This was a serious enough attack that it was officially reported to authorities. The Marion County dog warden was notified. The family was warned. They were told that Kilo posed a danger. They were advised to take corrective action. That could have meant euthanizing the dog. That could have meant rehoming the dog to a facility equipped to handle aggressive animals. That could have meant implementing extreme containment measures to ensure the dog never had access to vulnerable individuals. Blake Bates and Alyssa Smith did none of these things. They kept Kilo in the home. They kept Kilo around their infant son. They ignored the warning. They disregarded the documented evidence that this animal had already harmed a child. And in doing so, they set the stage for an entirely preventable tragedy. Prosecutor Ray Grogan would later call this a failure that cost Royal his life. A failure rooted in disregard for known risks. The household also included other children, an 8-year-old sibling who would be present on the day of the attack. A child far too young to be responsible for supervising an infant around a dangerous dog. April 28, 2024 started like any other day in the Bates household. Royal was 6 months old, still so small, still so helpless, still completely dependent on the adults around him for every single need. For food, for comfort, for safety. On this particular day, Royal was in the living room. His 8-year-old sibling was tasked with watching him. Think about that for a moment. An 8-year-old child, given the responsibility of supervising an infant, in a home with multiple aggressive dogs. Where were the parents? Why was a child left in charge of another child's safety? Royal was on the couch. Babies at 6 months are beginning to develop motor skills. They roll, they squirm, they move in unpredictable ways, and that's exactly what happened. Royal rolled off the couch. In most homes, a baby rolling off a couch would result in a bump, maybe a cry, maybe a trip to the doctor for a precautionary check. But this was not most homes. This home had Kilo. The moment Royal hit the floor, everything changed. Kilo, the pit bull mix with a documented history of attacking a child, was in the room. The dog that authorities had warned about. The dog that should have been removed from the home. The dog that Blake Bates and Alyssa Smith chose to keep, despite knowing the risks. What happened next was every parent's worst nightmare. Kilo attacked Royal. The dog tore into the infant's skull. A 6-month-old baby, defenseless, helpless, unable to fight back, unable to protect himself, unable to cry out for help in a way that could save him. The 8-year-old sibling was there. Imagine being that child. Imagine witnessing something so horrific. Imagine carrying that trauma for the rest of your life. Imagine the guilt, even though you were just a child yourself. Far too young to be put in that position. The attack was brutal. The injuries were catastrophic. Royal's tiny skull was no match for the powerful jaws of an aggressive pit bull. The dog that had already proven itself dangerous. The dog that had already attacked another child. The dog that authorities had warned about. And now that warning had become a death sentence for an innocent baby. Emergency services were called. Paramedics rushed to the scene. They found Royal with devastating head trauma. The kind of injuries that no infant could survive. The kind of injuries that haunt first responders for years afterward. Royal was transported to the hospital, but his fate was already sealed. The attack had been too severe. The damage too extensive. Medical professionals did everything they could, but there was nothing that could save this baby boy. Royal Bates was pronounced dead, 6 months old, his entire life ahead of him. Gone in an instant because the adults responsible for protecting him failed. They failed to remove a dangerous dog. They failed to supervise properly. They failed to heed warnings. They failed Royal in every possible way. The Marion Police Department immediately launched an investigation. This was not just a tragic accident. This was a preventable death. Detectives began interviewing everyone in the household. They documented the scene. They reviewed the dog's history. They pulled records from the Marion County dog warden showing the previous attack. They built a timeline of negligence. And as they pieced together what happened, one thing became crystal clear. Royal Bates died because the adults in his life prioritized keeping a dangerous dog over protecting their child. That's not an accident. That's criminal negligence. Kilo was seized by authorities and euthanized. The dog that should have been removed from the home a year earlier. The dog that gave every warning sign. The dog that had already proven itself a threat to children. Finally removed. But it was too late. The damage was done. Royal was gone. And now prosecutors had to decide. Would anyone be held accountable? Here's something that infuriated the community. Royal died in April 2024, but charges weren't filed until March 2025, nearly 11 months later. 11 months of Royal's family waiting for justice. 11 months of wondering if anyone would be held responsible. Why did it take so long? Building a criminal case for child endangerment requires meticulous documentation. Prosecutors need to prove not just that a child died, but that the parent's actions or inactions directly contributed to that death. They need to establish a pattern of negligence. They need expert testimony. They need to anticipate every defense argument. Marion County Prosecutor Ray Grogan was building an airtight case. He wasn't going to rush this and risk losing a trial. He was going to make sure justice was served. In March 2025, nearly a year after Royal's death, the Marion County Grand Jury returned indictments. Both Alyssa Smith and Blake Bates were charged. But here's what's interesting. They faced different charges. Blake Bates, as the owner of Kilo, was charged with third-degree felony involuntary manslaughter. The law recognizes that he had direct responsibility for the dog that killed Royal. He knew the dog's history. He knew about the previous attack. He chose to keep that dog in a home with an infant. That decision directly led to Royal's death. Alyssa Smith was charged with third-degree felony child endangering. As Royal's mother, she had a legal duty to protect her son. She knew about Kilo's dangerous history. She allowed that dog to remain in the home. She failed to ensure proper supervision. She created or allowed conditions that placed Royal in imminent danger. Both charges carried serious prison time. Both parents were looking at years behind bars. The community watched closely. Would they fight the charges? Would they go to trial? Or would they accept responsibility? Both defendants hired attorneys. Both attorneys began negotiating with prosecutors. Going to trial is always a gamble, especially in a case this emotionally charged, especially in a case with such clear evidence of negligence, especially in a case involving the death of an infant. Juries in child death cases are notoriously harsh on parents. Defense attorneys know this. So, plea negotiations began. The question became, what would prosecutors accept? What would the judge approve? And critically, what would the victim's family say? In Ohio, victims and their families have the right to provide victim impact statements before sentencing. These statements can be incredibly powerful. They can influence a judge's decision about whether to accept a plea deal or impose the maximum sentence. Neither Alyssa Smith nor Blake Bates could have predicted just how powerful those statements would be. Especially the statement from Royal's aunt. The statement that would change everything. Eventually, both defendants agreed to plead guilty. Blake Bates pleaded guilty to third-degree felony involuntary manslaughter. Alyssa Smith pleaded guilty to third-degree felony child endangering. No trial, no jury. Just guilty pleas and sentencing hearings. Alyssa Smith's sentencing was scheduled first. She walked into that courtroom believing she knew what would happen. She was wrong. The Marion County Courthouse, Judge Todd Anderson presiding. Alyssa Smith stood before the bench, her attorney beside her. In the gallery sat Royal's family members, people who loved that baby boy, people who were devastated by his death, people who wanted answers, who wanted accountability, who wanted justice. Prosecutor Ray Grogan was present, ready to argue for an appropriate sentence. Court staff prepared to record every word. This was the moment where the criminal justice system would speak, where society would say, "This is what happens when you fail to protect a child." But nobody in that courtroom knew just how dramatic this hearing would become. Based on the plea agreement and pre-sentencing negotiations, Alyssa Smith expected a 90-day jail sentence, 3 months behind bars, followed by probation, community service, counseling perhaps. It was a lenient sentence for a child's death. Some would say far too lenient. But plea agreements often involve compromises. Prosecutors avoid the expense and uncertainty of trial. Defendants avoid the risk of maximum sentences. Judges typically honor these agreements unless there's a compelling reason not to. Alyssa Smith had every reason to believe Judge Anderson would accept the 90-day recommendation. She probably thought about those 90 days, probably planned for them, probably told herself she could survive 3 months in jail, probably believed she'd be home by summer. She had no idea what was coming. Before sentencing, Judge Anderson invited victim impact statements. This is standard procedure in criminal cases. It gives victims and their families a voice, a chance to tell the court how the crime affected them, a chance to speak directly to the defendant, a chance to influence the sentence. Royal's family members came forward. They spoke about their grief, about the hole left in their lives, about a baby boy who would never grow up, about birthdays that would never be celebrated, about milestones that would never happen, first words never spoken, first steps never taken, first day of school never experienced. They spoke about the trauma of losing Royal in such a violent, preventable way. They spoke about the nightmares, the anger, the questions that would never have satisfying answers. Each statement was emotional. Each statement was powerful. But then Royal's aunt stepped up to the microphone, and what she said changed everything. Royal's aunt, Alyssa Smith's own sister, approached the podium. Family testifying against family is always significant. It shows a fracture so deep that blood ties cannot bridge it. It shows that the crime was so egregious that even family members cannot defend the defendant. And what Royal's aunt said was absolutely devastating. She didn't just talk about Royal's death. She talked about Alyssa Smith's pattern of behavior, her lack of care for her children, her failure as a mother that extended far beyond the day Royal died. She questioned Alyssa's remorse. She told Judge Anderson that Alyssa had shown no genuine grief, no real accountability, no meaningful change. She described a mother who prioritized herself over her children, who made choices that consistently put her kids at risk, who failed to provide basic care and supervision. She painted a picture of someone who should never have been entrusted with a child's life, someone who had been given chance after chance and squandered every one, someone who, even after Royal's death, showed no real understanding of her responsibility. The courtroom was silent. You could hear people breathing. This wasn't just grief talking. This was someone who knew Alyssa Smith intimately, someone who had watched her fail as a mother repeatedly, someone who could no longer stay silent. Judge Anderson listened intently. His expression changed. The 90-day sentence that seemed like a done deal suddenly felt inadequate. When the victim impact statements concluded, Judge Todd Anderson had a decision to make. He could honor the plea agreement, give Alyssa Smith her 90 days and move on. Or he could exercise his judicial discretion. Ohio law gives judges the authority to reject plea agreements if they believe the recommended sentence doesn't serve justice. Judge Anderson looked at Alyssa Smith. He looked at the family members in the gallery. He looked at the case file in front of him. and then he spoke. His words were measured but firm. He acknowledged the plea agreement. He acknowledged that prosecutors had recommended 90 days. But he also acknowledged what he had just heard. The testimony about Alyssa's lack of remorse, the pattern of negligence, the failure to protect not just Royal, but her other children as well. He said that 90 days was not sufficient, that this case demanded more accountability, that Royal's death required a sentence that reflected the severity of the crime, that the community needed to see that child endangerment resulting in death has serious consequences. The courtroom held its breath. Alyssa Smith's face went pale. Her attorney tensed. Everyone knew what was coming. Judge Todd Anderson sentenced Alyssa Smith to the maximum penalty allowed under Ohio law for third-degree felony child endangering, 3 years in prison. Not 90 days. 3 years. 36 months. Over 1,200 days. Alyssa Smith's legs nearly gave out. Her attorney steadied her. Family members in the gallery had mixed reactions. Some nodded in approval. Some wept. Some showed no emotion at all, still numb from Royal's death. Prosecutor Ray Grogan remained stoic, but you could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Justice had been served. Not the justice that brings Royal back. Nothing can do that. But justice that says, when you fail to protect a child, when that child dies because of your negligence, there are consequences. Real consequences. Alyssa Smith was taken into custody immediately. No going home to gather belongings. No saying goodbye to family. She was handcuffed and led out of the courtroom to begin serving her 3-year sentence. The Marion County Sheriff's Department would transport her to the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. She would be processed, photographed, given prison clothing, assigned a cell, and she would spend the next 3 years thinking about the choices she made. The warnings she ignored, the son she lost, the 90 days she expected, the 3 years she received. Let's break down the legal framework here because it's important to understand what Alyssa Smith was actually convicted of. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 2919.22, child endangering occurs when a parent, guardian, or custodian creates a substantial risk to the health or safety of a child. Third-degree felony child endangering specifically applies when the offender's actions result in serious physical harm to the child. In Royal's case, the harm was fatal. The statute doesn't require intent to harm. It doesn't require that the parent wanted the child to die. It only requires that the parent created conditions that posed substantial risk and that serious harm resulted. Alyssa Smith knew Kilo had attacked before. She knew the dog was dangerous. She allowed that dog to remain in the home with her infant son. She failed to ensure adequate supervision. Those actions created substantial risk. Royal died. That's textbook child endangering resulting in serious physical harm. Third-degree felonies in Ohio carry a sentencing range of 9 months to 36 months in prison. Judge Anderson could have sentenced Alyssa Smith anywhere within that range. He chose the maximum, 36 months. Why? Judges consider multiple factors when sentencing: the severity of the crime, the defendant's criminal history, the likelihood of reoffending, the need for deterrence, the impact on victims, the defendant's remorse and acceptance of responsibility. In Alyssa's case, several factors pushed Judge Anderson toward the maximum. First, a child died. That's the most severe outcome possible. Second, the death was entirely preventable. The dog's dangerous history was documented. Warnings had been given. Third, the victim impact testimony raised serious questions about Alyssa's remorse and her care for her other children. Fourth, the judge needed to send a message to the community. Child endangerment has consequences. Parents cannot ignore known dangers and escape accountability when tragedy strikes. The maximum sentence served all these purposes. It punished Alyssa appropriately. It deterred other parents from similar negligence. It validated the family's grief. And it told Royal's story in the language the legal system understands. Years behind bars. How does this sentence compare to other dog attack cases involving children? The answer varies wildly depending on jurisdiction and circumstances. Some parents whose children were killed by family dogs received no criminal charges at all, with authorities treating the deaths as tragic accidents. Others received probation or short jail sentences. But increasingly, prosecutors and judges are recognizing that keeping a known dangerous dog around children is not an accident, it's negligence. In recent years, we've seen parents sentenced to multiple years in prison when their dogs killed their children, especially when there was documented prior aggression. Alyssa Smith's 3-year sentence fits within this trend toward accountability. It's not the harshest sentence ever imposed in such a case, but it's far from the most lenient. The fact that Judge Anderson rejected the 90-day plea recommendation is significant. Judges typically honor plea agreements negotiated between prosecutors and defense attorneys. Rejecting a plea deal can create appellate issues and upset the careful balance of the criminal justice system. But judges have the authority to reject plea deals when they believe justice demands it. Judge Anderson clearly felt that 90 days was grossly inadequate given the circumstances. The victim impact testimony gave him the information he needed to justify that decision. This sends a powerful message. Plea deals are not guaranteed, especially in cases involving child deaths. Now let's talk about Blake Bates, Royal's father and the owner of Kilo. Remember, Blake was charged with third-degree felony involuntary manslaughter, not child endangering. Why the different charge? Because Blake had direct ownership and control of the dog that killed Royal. Involuntary manslaughter in Ohio occurs when someone causes another person's death as a proximate result of committing or attempting to commit a felony. Blake's felony was keeping a dangerous dog in violation of Ohio's dangerous dog laws. He knew Kilo had attacked before. He knew authorities had warned him. He knew the dog posed a threat. Yet he kept that dog in a home with an infant. When Kilo killed Royal, Blake's negligence in maintaining control of a known dangerous animal directly caused that death. Blake Bates also pleaded guilty and faced sentencing. His case didn't receive quite as much attention as Alyssa's, perhaps because the dramatic courtroom rejection of the plea deal in Alyssa's case had already made headlines. But Blake's accountability was equally important. He was the dog's owner. He had the most direct responsibility for Kilo's presence in the home. He had the power to remove that threat and chose not to. Blake received a sentence that reflected his culpability. While specific details of his sentence weren't as widely publicized as Alyssa's, the involuntary manslaughter charge carried the same sentencing range, 9 to 36 months. Both parents now faced years behind bars. Both parents had time to reflect on their failures. Both parents would carry the weight of Royal's death for the rest of their lives. But no amount of prison time would bring Royal back. Some might ask, who bears more responsibility? The mother who failed to protect, or the father who owned the dangerous dog? The answer is both. They were partners in negligence. They both knew the risks. They both failed to act. They both prioritized keeping a dangerous animal over protecting their son. The law recognized their shared culpability by charging them both with serious felonies. Royal's death highlights a critical gap in how America handles dangerous dogs. Every state has different laws. Some states have breed-specific legislation banning pit bulls and other breeds deemed dangerous. Other states prohibit such bans, arguing that any dog can be dangerous regardless of breed. Some states have strict liability laws, making owners automatically responsible for any injuries their dogs cause. Others require proof of negligence or prior knowledge of aggression. Ohio has what's called a one-bite rule with modifications. Essentially, once a dog has shown aggressive behavior or bitten someone, The owner is on notice that the dog is dangerous. From that point forward, the owner has a legal duty to prevent future attacks. Failure to do so can result in criminal charges. That's exactly what happened here. Kilo attacked a child. Authorities documented it. Blake and Alyssa were on notice. They failed to act. Royal died, and the law held them accountable. But here's the problem. These laws only work if they're enforced. If dog wardens follow up, if prosecutors file charges, if judges impose meaningful sentences. Too often, dangerous dogs remain in homes until tragedy strikes. Too often, warnings are ignored. Too often, children pay the price. Beyond the dangerous dog issue, this case exposes another critical problem: inadequate child supervision. An 8-year-old was left to watch a 6-month-old infant in a home with aggressive dogs. That's not supervision. That's abandonment of parental responsibility. Children cannot be expected to protect other children from serious dangers. They don't have the judgment. They don't have the physical capability. They don't have the life experience. When parents delegate supervision to children too young for the task, they're gambling with lives. In this case, that gamble cost Royal everything. Where were Blake and Alyssa when Royal was in the living room? Why wasn't an adult present? Why was a child given responsibility that should never have been placed on their shoulders? These questions haunted the investigation. They influenced the judge's sentencing decision. And they should haunt every parent who considers leaving young children unsupervised in potentially dangerous situations. Think about all the victims in this case beyond Royal. The 8-year-old sibling who witnessed the attack will carry that trauma forever. That child will need years of therapy. That child will have nightmares. That child may struggle with guilt, even though they bear no responsibility. The first responders who arrived at the scene and tried to save Royal will remember that day for the rest of their careers. Paramedics and police officers in small communities like Marion don't see infant deaths regularly. When they do, it stays with them. The extended family members who loved Royal and now live with his absence. Grandparents who will never watch him grow up. Aunts and uncles who will never take him to his first baseball game. Cousins who will never play with him. The community of Marion, Ohio, which lost its sense of safety. When a baby dies in such a violent, preventable way, it shakes everyone. Parents hold their own children tighter. Neighbors look at each other differently. Trust erodes. The ripple effects of Royal's death extend far beyond the courtroom and the prison cells where his parents now sit. The 8-year-old child who witnessed Royal's death faces a lifetime of psychological challenges. Child psychologists call this complex trauma, experiencing a terrifying event while also being developmentally unprepared to process it. This child will likely experience PTSD symptoms, intrusive memories, nightmares, hypervigilance around dogs, difficulty sleeping. They may develop survivor's guilt, wondering if they could have done something differently to save Royal. They may struggle with trust, especially toward their parents who put them in that impossible situation. They may have difficulty forming healthy attachments in future relationships. They'll need specialized trauma therapy, possibly for years. And they'll need support understanding that they bear zero responsibility for what happened. The adults failed, not the child. But convincing a traumatized 8-year-old of that truth is incredibly difficult. Marion is a small city of about 36,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows someone who knows someone. When Royal died, the entire community felt it. Local news covered the story extensively. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people defended Blake and Alyssa, calling it a tragic accident. Others demanded the harshest possible punishment. The Marion County Dog Warden's office faced scrutiny. Why wasn't more done after the first attack? Why was the dog allowed to remain in the home? Local officials promised to review dangerous dog protocols. Community members organized to push for stricter enforcement. Royal's death became a catalyst for change. But change came too late for Royal. That's the tragedy of reactive rather than proactive policy. We wait for children to die before we take action. We wait for tragedies to force our hand. Royal deserved better. Every child deserves better. When this case hit social media and true crime communities, the response was overwhelming. People were outraged. How could parents ignore such obvious warnings? How could they leave a baby vulnerable to a known dangerous dog? The comments sections were filled with anger, grief, and calls for justice. Some people focused on the breed issue, arguing that pit bulls are inherently dangerous and should be banned. Others pushed back, saying any dog can be dangerous with irresponsible owners. Some commenters shared their own stories of dog attacks, of children injured, of near misses that could have ended in tragedy. The case became a flashpoint for broader debates about parenting, personal responsibility, and animal control. When Judge Anderson rejected the 90-day plea deal and imposed the 3-year sentence, social media erupted again, this time largely in approval. People felt that justice had been served, that a judge had finally held negligent parents truly accountable. The case became a reference point. Remember Royal Bates became shorthand for what happens when parents prioritize pets over children's safety. Local media in Marion covered the case extensively from the beginning, but national media attention came in waves. The initial attack and death generated some coverage. The charging of both parents nearly a year later brought another wave. But the biggest media attention came after Alyssa Smith's sentencing, when Judge Anderson rejected the plea deal. That's when national outlets picked up the story. Why? Because it had all the elements of a compelling narrative. An innocent victim, negligent parents, a dramatic courtroom moment, and a judge willing to buck the system. True crime podcasts discussed the case. YouTube channels analyzed it. News aggregators featured it. The story resonated because it touched on universal fears. The vulnerability of children, the responsibility of parents, and the question of when accidents become crimes. Judge Anderson's decision to reject the plea agreement and impose the maximum sentence sets an important precedent, not just in Ohio, but potentially nationwide. Other judges facing similar cases will look at this outcome. Prosecutors building cases against parents whose children were killed by family dogs will cite Royal's case as justification for serious charges. Defense attorneys will have to recalibrate their expectations about plea deals in child endangerment cases. The message is clear. When parents ignore documented warnings about dangerous dogs, when children die as a result, the criminal justice system will respond with meaningful consequences. This case demonstrates that it was just an accident is no longer an acceptable defense when the danger was known and the death was preventable. The law recognizes a difference between genuine accidents and foreseeable tragedies resulting from negligence. Royal's case falls squarely in the latter category. This case also has implications for Child Protective Services agencies. When CPS learns that a dangerous dog lives in a home with children, what should they do? In many jurisdictions, the presence of a dangerous animal can be grounds for investigation and intervention, but enforcement varies wildly. Some CPS agencies take aggressive action, removing children or requiring removal of the animal. Others take a hands-off approach, viewing it as outside their mandate. Royal's case argues for more aggressive intervention. If authorities know a dog has attacked before, if that dog lives with children, if parents refuse to remove the threat, CPS should have the authority and obligation to act. Waiting for a second attack means waiting for another victim. That's unacceptable. Expect to see policy changes in Ohio and potentially other states requiring CPS to treat dangerous animals as a child safety issue, warranting intervention. Royal Bates lived only 6 months. He never spoke his first word, never took his first step, never celebrated his first birthday. His entire life was stolen by preventable negligence. But his death is not meaningless. Royal's case has sparked conversations about dangerous dogs, parental responsibility, and child protection that are happening in homes, courtrooms, and legislative chambers across America. His name has become synonymous with the need for accountability when parents fail to protect their children from known dangers. Judge Anderson's sentencing decision ensures that Royal's death will influence how similar cases are handled for years to come. That's Royal's legacy, a push toward a world where children are better protected, where warnings are heeded, where negligence has consequences. So, what can we learn from Royal's tragedy? First, take warnings seriously. If a dog attacks once, it can attack again. Don't rationalize. Don't minimize. Don't convince yourself it won't happen to you. Second, children's safety must always come first. Always. Before your attachment to a pet, before convenience, before financial concerns, before everything. Third, adequate supervision is non-negotiable. Young children cannot be left in charge of infants, especially in potentially dangerous situations. Fourth, if you see something, say something. If you know a dangerous dog lives with children, report it. You might save a life. Fifth, support stronger enforcement of dangerous dog laws and child protection policies. Contact your local officials. Advocate for change. And sixth, remember that accidents and negligence are not the same thing. When danger is known and ignored, when tragedy results, accountability must follow. Royal's death was not an accident. It was a foreseeable consequence of documented negligence. If you're a parent watching this, hug your children tonight. Look at their faces. Think about how precious and fragile they are. Think about your responsibility to protect them from every threat you can reasonably prevent. If you have a dog with any history of aggression, any warning signs, any concerning behavior, take action now. Don't wait. Don't rationalize. Don't convince yourself it'll be fine. Rehome the dog. Implement strict separation protocols. Whatever it takes. Because the alternative is unthinkable. The alternative is what happened to Royal. And if you're thinking, it won't happen to me, remember that Blake and Alyssa probably thought the same thing, right up until the moment it did. Royal Bates should be celebrating his birthday right now. He should be learning to walk, starting to talk, discovering the world around him. Instead, he's gone. His parents are in prison. His sibling is traumatized. His family is shattered. And a community is left asking how this was allowed to happen. This case is a stark reminder that our choices have consequences, that negligence kills, that warnings exist for a reason, that children depend entirely on adults to keep them safe. Judge Todd Anderson understood this. That's why he rejected a plea deal he felt was inadequate. That's why he imposed the maximum sentence. That's why he sent a message that child endangerment resulting in death will not be treated lightly. Royal can't be brought back, but his story can prevent future tragedies. If even one parent watches this video and decides to remove a dangerous dog from their home, Royal's death will have saved a life. That's the best legacy we can give him. Thank you for watching this difficult but important case. Royal's story needed to be told. His life mattered. His death matters. And the lessons we can learn from this tragedy matter. If this video impacted you, please share it. Help spread awareness about the dangers of keeping aggressive dogs in homes with children. Help prevent the next Royal Bates. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dive true crime analysis. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this case and on how we can better protect children. And remember, Royal Bates, 6 months old, gone too soon, never forgotten.